Hey guys, Keith here. This is a second video on releases 2019.33 through to 2019.53. This one I'm going to focus on the changes to xLights. The last video I focused on the changes to xSchedule. There's been a fair few, although not as many enhancements over the last couple of months as we've really been focused on trying to shake out some bugs, particularly some long-running bugs that were causing the odd crashes here and there. And so it's been a bit of a journey because every time we've tried to fix it, we've often created other problems. But I think as at 53, we're in a pretty good state. Not perfect, but definitely pretty good. So let's go through and talk about some of the enhancements that have come along since 33. And so we'll start back with 33. And the first one here is around deferring the Papagayo dictionary load. What that means, and look, this is a minor thing, and really it's just a usability thing. If you go up here and you create a lyric track, it used to be that when you right-clicked on here and said breakdown phrase, at that point it would go away and load up the Papagayo dictionary. And for those who have done it before, you know that it takes up to a minute or so to load the dictionary. It's that large, and so it would go off and load the dictionary. Now, of course, if you're now going to go and break this down to phonemes, it didn't really matter when we loaded it. It had to be loaded. It only got loaded once, so it didn't really matter. But if you were, did the phrases and were just breaking down the words and laying all the words out, the need to go and load the dictionary at that point was kind of frustrating in the workflow. And so now we've delayed it until it's really, really needed. So when I break down the words here to the phonemes, now it would go out and load the dictionary because at that point in time is when it actually needs it. Parallel discovery of FPP. I'm not going to show this. I'm not going to show any of the FPP things today because I don't have an FPP plugged in. But what this means is that when you're doing things like pressing the discovery button on the front here, and it goes off to discover any FPP instances that might be out there on your network, it will do that in parallel rather than doing it sequentially. So if you've got multiple network adapters, I believe it'll flick it out all at once to all networks to try and find the FPP instances. And that just reduces the amount of time it takes to complete the discovery. The challenge with discovery is discovery for all the different flavors is a broadcast. So we broadcast something out onto the network and say, is there anyone out there of this particular type? And then they all respond back to us. The problem with that is we need to give them time to respond. And if you don't give them a lot of time, then the chances are that you might miss a response. And so xLights has to wait a given period of time to see whether the responses are coming back. And of course, the more different types of discovery that we're doing, the longer this takes. And so by doing some of the things in parallel, it just reduces that time. Alternate sweep on the VU meter. Now, for those of you that remember a couple of months ago, we introduced these timed sweeps. And the concept of a timed sweep, if I stop that, with the VU meter, and I don't need an audio track because this is a timing track type VU meter thing. Let's throw it onto our he says, sorry, this is a very strange layout that I was using for testing something. All right, so now what we've got here is we've got a VU meter on a matrix. And if I change it to this timing event timed sweep, so what we've done is we've dropped a VU meter down here. We've put it onto a model and we've pointed it at a particular timing track, and this is doing an event sweep. And what you'll notice is that the speed of the sweep is actually proportional to the timing track distance. So when they're close together, it goes quickly. When it's far apart, it goes slowly, and the closer together it is, the faster it goes. And so that's really good on an arch where you want the arch to bounce across or to move across in time with the beat. The challenge is, well, what if you want to go one way for the first period and then the other way for the second? And there was no easy way to do that other than dropping lots of these VU meters down. And so what we did was we added the alternate time sweep. And so what that will do is it will bounce so that as it goes across, it alternates backwards and forwards as it goes past each timing mark. So if you want your arches to bounce backwards and forwards and your beat's not regular, so you want to use the timing marks to indicate when the sweep should land, now you can do it very easily. Drop a single effect, a bunch of timing marks, and you're all done. Add key binding for suspend render. What does that mean? Well, that just basically means we've got this suspend render down here. I don't know if I actually covered this when this got released. This is a checkbox. If you click check on it, what it means is that xLights won't do any background rendering when you're sequencing. So when you drop an effect, the effect just won't render. So if I put suspend render down here, I come up here and I drop a butterfly down here, right? There's the butterfly. Absolutely nothing's happened. If I play it, nothing at all. And the reason is because the rendering has been suspended. Now you can, even when it's suspended, you can click render all and it will still go and do the rendering. But this is useful if you're doing a whole bunch of, moving effects around and just doing a whole bunch of cleanup, and you don't want xLights to be bogged down in running around trying to render every time you make a single change. Suspending the rendering basically says to xLights, don't do all the work. Let me just move everything around first, and then I'll get you to render and get everything up to date. So it can speed things up, particularly on really, really large shows. This can make xLights a bit more responsive at the expense of obviously not being able to immediately see what you've done. But what does it mean in this one where we add it to the key bindings? Well, essentially, he says not knowing which show folder he's in, but I guess it doesn't really matter. Let's just go and grab this one here. In the key bindings file here, basically there's a whole bunch of key bindings in here, and one of them is a render toggle. So if I do a search for render, there it is, toggle render. At the moment, the key code is blank, which means that there's actually no key associated with it. But if you'd like to associate a key or a set of keys that you could press and make this toggle on and off, you could now do that by just editing that key bindings file. Just remember that if you're going to do this, make sure you shut down xLights before you edit the key bindings file, because xLights will overwrite it when it closes, and so you will lose any of the edits that you may have made. So yeah, make sure you've got xLights closed. There's a couple of FPP Connect things. I'm not going to go through them. They relate largely to uploading to the FPP controllers and their options, etc. Without FPP Connect and without my COP controllers connected, it's kind of hard to demo those sorts of things. So I'm going to move on. Toggle the presets dialog as a key binding option. What that means, again, it's another key binding. And it's probably, so if I look for preset, I think this one's actually defined. There it is there. So what it says is it's actually bound to the F10 with the control key. So if I'm in the sequencer and I press control and F10, there's the preset window coming up. So that's added as a preset. We like to have as many things as possible via the keyboard, because for some users who maybe struggle with dexterity with a mouse, etc., the keyboard can represent a great way for them to do stuff. Add some checks for slow storage and overly outsized images and video that drives rendering work. Okay, so check sequence is one of those things that we keep enhancing as we encounter people who have problems or situations which lead to unexpected performance problems or unexpected outcomes. We try to include those things into check sequence so that you've always got that expert ready there to review your work and tell you the sorts of things that are going on. So there's two checks that have been added here to check sequence. The first one is checking for slow storage. So what it's doing is it's going to all the videos and images and other files that you've connected up to your sequence, and it's doing a quick check to see how fast that storage device is responding. And if that storage device responds slowly, you'll get a warning in check sequence. Typically, the things we recommend against is most home-based NAS systems, it's not a great idea to store your show folder on a NAS drive. Those NAS drives don't perform super well compared to a local hard disk drive. and so you can actually get some quite slow rendering times, particularly if you're doing things like storing your render cache on those drives, or you're accessing large video files or whatever over the NAS. They can be quite slow. Also be wary of, old slow USB sticks, particularly where the sticks have been used extensively, and you're writing to it. That can be quite slow because of the way in which flash RAM is written to. It can be quite slow. A fresh one generally a lot better, and obviously, you want a faster one rather than an old USB one or 1.1 memory stick. You can also run into some situations with slow storage where you're running maybe software on your machine that's doing excessive scanning, etc., that can slow down access to files, etc. So you'll get warnings in check sequence. Now, it's fair to say that we probably need to tune that a little. I'm not sure whether it's aggressive enough in complaining about slow performance, but it is what it is for now. The overly outsized images and video, this is situations where you've put a 4K video onto a 50:16 matrix or something like that. What that drives is an enormous amount of work in xLights to take a 4 million pixel image and try to squash it down to less than 1,000 pixels. That's an enormous amount of work that has to be done every single frame and every single time you render. Now, obviously, rendering caching helps reduce that amount of work, but it's still a lot of work. And so one of the things that you can consider doing when you have these really high resolution images or these really high resolution videos is pre-processing those videos down to a resolution that's a lot smaller before loading it into xLights, and that will reduce the amount of work that needs to be done when we render. FPP Connect, don't expand multi-universes, E1. So this has to do with the uploading to FPP, where, and we've defaulted it this way now. So when you create an E1.31 in here, and I'll just do this with 10, by default, we create it as a single line item, and I believe this is just when you upload it to the Falcon now, the Falcon Pi Player now, instead of expanding that out to be 10 lines on the Falcon, it just does it as a single line. This is by far our preferred way for you to define E1.31 today, and in fact, there are actually advantages to defining your E1.31 this way, with things like the controller visualizer, etc., which works quite happily with this style of declaration. But if I defined, if I instead had, and I can't change it, but if I add another one, if I added another 10 universes here, start this at 11, define 10 universes, and I uncheck this one output, right, and it creates me 10 510 channel universes. You can do more with this particular layout. Although it represents the same channels and the same sort of network traffic, xLights has got some abilities to deal with this in a much better way, with things like auto model layout and all of that sort of stuff that you just can't do if you choose to go this way. So we strongly recommend you go this way. There are really not that many situations where having individual universes is actually necessary anymore. The toggle effect assist button to the window management toolbar. What Scott means by this is when you're in the sequencer now, there's an extra toolbar button up here, which will bring up the effect assist window and hide it. So that's that one. Import export model to the circle model. From memory, so there's two types of exports that we generally have on models. One is export as a custom xLights model. What that does is it takes this this is the circle model, so it's not a custom model, and it actually turns it into a custom model. And that can be really useful when you've got a prop that is a circle model, but you've wired in some bizarre way that is not the way that we support. You can then take a model, export it as a custom, and then you can go in and just change the pixel layout to be whatever way you want it to be. But he's also added here the ability to export it as an xLights model, which means that when someone imports that, it will still come in as a circle model. And of course, the advantage of exporting things as a model file is all the submodels and everything else go with it. So the person who's importing your model gets all of that for free. Add the layer blending help button. So again, Scott's been busy. This has been a long held complaint that if I come up here to the layer blending, it's a wonderful tooltip, but it goes away too quickly. And and if you wanted to move your mouse down to sort of point at the one that you're thinking of using, you can't do that. So it's a real pain. So Scott's added this question mark, and when you click on the question mark, it'll open in your default text editor, basically the text from the tooltip. And so you can print this out or just put it onto another screen and access it. So yeah, oh yeah, jump back up. All right, default saving of XMap to the same name as it was loaded from. What that means is if you go up to here and do an import and import effects, I will do this. I just need to go to a folder that actually has, oh yeah, this one here. So if you load up a sequence and then you come in here and do a load mapping, and let's say you load fred.xmap, it used to be when you save the mapping, maybe you've done some edits and you went save mapping at the end, it would pop it up and it would not give you a default name. Now what it will do is it will default to whatever you loaded it as. So if you loaded fred.xmap, it's going to by default want to save it as fred.xmap. But of course you can override it. You may want to keep it as a slightly separate file. And so that's all that one means. Expand the fixture effect rate limit adjustment. Okay, what does that mean? Well, basically, let's hide some things here so we can see things. Basically, with this frame rate adjustment, it's just expanded the range that this slider can go up to. I think someone needed a bigger number. And given there's no value curve, there's no real downside to making a change to that to make that range bigger. So that was done. All right. So the next one is this let user control the render cache location. That's here in this subfolders button. We give you control over where a whole bunch of folders are stored. And we've added the render cache directory as one you can set. Now, generally with the render cache, you want to put the render cache on your local machine, not in a folder that's getting replicated to Dropbox or Google Drive or anything else, because it tends to get very large. The render cache folder gets even larger than the old version 1 FSCQ files because every effect potentially ends up in there. They don't actually, it's only certain effects, but it can still end up being really, really large. So you want to keep it local and not be replicating it up into the cloud because that's a lot of effort and time. And you definitely don't want to have it in a shared folder with someone else. Enhanced keyboard key arrow handling with effects grid. What this means is in the sequencer, and it's a little bit hard to show, but let's go in. What it just means here is let's add a new timing. Let's add a metronome. Yeah, half a second's good. So if you're in here and moving across, now as you move across, it automatically scrolls. And it's also true that if we had more than a screen full here and you were pressing the arrow keys, then the arrow key would cause the screen to automatically scroll. In the past, it didn't do that, and that was a little annoying. So just a minor user enhancement. Fix the workflow around the creation of timing tracks. It's just made this add timing track a little bit smarter. If I keep adding things, it does things like it automatically recognizes that it already had an empty, so it creates an empty too. Just those sort of things that just try and make that process a little bit easier. Add an open node layout into the browser for better printing. So what does that mean? Well, that just means that if I'm here and I do this node layout, and this one's, that one's, oh, it's a single channels Y. Sorry, I've been playing with single channel models. All right, so you get the node layout. You can print from here, and for something like this, it'll be fine. But some of the bigger models, printing from here actually doesn't generate something useful. So now there's an open in browser button, which will open it up in your favorite browser, and you can take advantage of the printing capabilities of your browser, which are often better than xLights for rendering that sort of stuff. So that's what that one means. Add text and shape effect font bulk editing. This is just a small enhancement. We'll do it with the shape effect, but this works the same way with the text effect. If you've selected multiple of these, obviously, sorry, let's go back and do that again. These are set as circle. Let's bulk edit this. Let's make these emojis. Okay, and once they're emojis, yep, we can now bulk edit the font here, and there's now a bulk edit for the font, whereas previously you couldn't bulk edit the font. Now you can. Some more FPP, some additional configuration support. So this was when Dan added support for the smart receivers on the BeagleBone. So he added support for the upload. There were some tweaks that he had to make to the upload process. This one here, the FPP upload used to have difficulty if you'd set a UI password on FPP, and Dan's done some work to make that work. Pixel counts to the controller visualizer. Am I going to be able to demo this? Maybe I am. I have to pretend it's a particular type of controller. And now I can click visualize. No. Oh, that's right, because I haven't gone and set. In order to use a visualizer, you actually have to go in and say what port everything is on. So we'll put that on port 1. We'll put that on port 6. We'll put that on port 11. Oh, that'll do. Okay, so now if we come back to setup and we right click here and go to visualize controller, you can see that it shows you everything that's connected to each port, and it now shows you the number of pixels connected to each thing, which for some reason are all zeros. Not entirely sure why they're all zeros. Oh, these are single channel models. Yeah, okay, they should be on a DMX port. Okay, that wasn't helpful. Let's make them DMX. Actually, let's get rid of that entirely. Let's go back to the beginning. That's the problem with just making stuff up as you go along. All right, so this is a regular RGB ribbon. Let's do this one. Let's put this onto output 1. Done. Okay, that didn't work. Let's set that to 0. Set that to 0. And let's set that to 0. I'll save all of those. Oops, no, we don't need to save that. Sorry, we need to save that. We'll go back here and we'll right click and we'll visualize. Okay, now you can see the pixels. So you can see how it's showing the pixel counts. Now, if there were multiple models, those models would be listed out here and you'd have the pixels, and this would be the total number of pixels that are actually on that port. So, and of course you can right click and print this as well if you would like to. Very useful when you're setting up your controllers. Add dissolve and circular swirl to transitions. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. Let's take something simple like a bars effect. We'll throw the bars effect down here. That's only running for a second, so let's stretch this out a little. Let's come up to here. Let's add a 1 second inward transition, and you can see that there's now a dissolve. So it dissolves in, an in transition, and a circular swirl in transition. which kind of swirls it all in. This bars effect is not probably the most effective. Let's go back, make that circular swirl over 1 second, and you can see how it's kind of swirling its way in. So yeah, some additional in and out transitions. And a rotation on the from middle. So if we go to the from middle, which has existed for a while, you can now use the adjustment and control the angle at which the from middle occurs. So there's that. Logarithmic X-axis to the music effect. This one's a little bit hard to show without me going and getting some music, and I don't think that's necessary at this point. We'll just talk about it. So on the music effect, the way the music, actually, I will go and do it because I can explain again what the music effect does, because it's a fairly underutilized effect. So we've gone and we've created an MP3. We've got an MP3 file here, and let's drop in a music effect down onto our matrix. Okay. So what you see here, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move the start note down to be at the very low end. And I'm going to scale the bars. So what it's doing here is it's doing a frequency analysis of the song at this particular point, and depending on whether the song at that particular note happens to have crossed this sensitivity threshold, it's drawing a bar. Now the problem is when we do the frequency breakdown, and you can see this best actually with the VU meter. If we throw the VU meter down and you change it to spectrogram, he says, thinking, where's the spectrogram gone? Oh, it's up the top. All right, so if you put it on spectrogram and you increase again this range so that you're seeing the upper and lower end. In fact, let's try and do the whole range. Oh, we have to set the number of bars up to be 50 or thereabouts. Notice how the spectrogram, there's lots of detail at this end. Each bar is only 1 wide, but once you get down to the bottom end, notice how wide these bars are. And the reason is because the algorithm that goes and works out the frequency breakdown of the music has got lots of resolution at the top end, but not a lot of resolution at the bottom end. And that creates this sort of uneven looking display where it seems really busy on the right-hand side. And so on the spectrogram here, we added this logarithmic X-axis. And what that does is basically rescales the X-axis such that it spreads it out, and you get this better spread across the X-axis. Well, the music effect here, or this particular enhancement, has done just exactly the same thing. It's spread it out and made it more even, so that you get a more even looking display when you're using the music effect, when you're using those low notes. That's all that is. Sorry, a long explanation, but that's what that does. Add F12 to force keyboard focuses sequence to allow keyboard recovery. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, basically, if you really are a keyboard jockey, and there's lots of commands that you can use in the sequencer here to do things like, you can come up and, whoops, did not want to do that. If you come up here and put tags in, you can use keyboards to jump to tags and all sorts of things. But the problem is if you come over and you're in here and you now want to use a keyboard command, it just doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because the focus is now over here on these controls, and we can't steal the focus away. And so we've just added it such that if you press the F12 key, it actually forces the focus back to the grid. And now you can press any of the keyboard commands like home or end or page up or page down or whatever else. And it will respect it, and it will use that key and apply it to the grid rather than trying to apply it over here on the effect settings or wherever else it happens to have focus. So yeah, if you're a keyboard jockey, that F12 key kind of lets you gain control back to the keyboard. Had the UI stop the user from setting up previews other than default in 3D? A couple of people have complained about this, but it's kind of important. If you've got multiple previews up here, trusty Fred, You notice that when you're in default here in 3D, you can't change the preview. The only preview that you can edit in 3D is default. It used to be that you could edit any of the previews in 3D. The problem is once you get to the sequencer, none of those previews could actually be used in 3D, because when we built 3D, we built it for default. The idea was that you were either using multiple previews or you were using default. And so to stop people falling into the trap of setting up multiple previews in 3D and then getting to the sequencer and suddenly finding out, oh, I can't use them all, why did I waste all my time? We've tried to enforce that through these menus now, so you don't get yourself caught up in that situation. Let user adjust the maximum blank frames when generating custom model. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, in the tools generate custom model, when you're processing a video here, okay, I have to go find a video. Desktop. Where's my stash folder? Why can't I see my stash folder? Oh, there it is. I think it's in here. Auto model generation, this will be it. Okay, so I'm just gonna pick one. It really doesn't matter which one it is. Let's run this video quickly. It takes about 15 seconds while it goes through and watches the video. So yeah, xLights is at this point in time busy watching the video, trying to work out where those start frames were. Of course you can do it manually, but having xLights watch the video, it actually does a pretty good job most of the time in finding it for you and making sure that it's got the best position possible. Okay, so there it is. It's found it and it likes it. And so we go ahead into automatic. What it now does, okay, sorry, it needs to be a bit wider. You've got this blank frames limit. And what that does is there are some situations where maybe some of the LEDs are hidden from sight, and so you get this elongated period of time during the playback of the video where it can't see any lights. And at the moment, by default, once it reaches 30 frames and it hasn't found the lights, xLights gives up and says, well, clearly it must be over. Now, what happens if it's not? What happens if you happen to have 30 pixels that can't be seen and you're trying to map all the ones that can be seen? You might want to increase this limit here so that xLights doesn't give up as quickly. So that's now in there for those that are processing certain types of videos. Add the ability to convert ZCPP output to E1.31. What that means is you might be, in the early days, you might be running around and using ZCPP and you're having a great fun with it. But at the end of the day, you really actually want to use E1.31 because you can use the FPP, and FPP refuses to support ZCPP. So you're now stuck, right? It was great while you were testing your controllers out. You were configuring the Falcon controller as you went, and it was really, really smooth. But now you want to play your show. You want to move everything over to FPP, and ZCPP won't work for you. So now there is the ability to right click here and just convert that to E1.31, and it will just change that over, make it an E1.31, and now you can push it to your Falcon Pi player. You will obviously need to convert your Falcon now to use E1.31. You'll have to do all the uploads and everything else, because one of the downsides of E1.31 is you've got to push the configuration to the controller. It doesn't happen automatically, but now you can play it from FPP, and FPP will quite happily push that data to the Falcon and everything will work. So now you kind of get that ZCPP during your setup, your build and test phase, and then once you're all ready to run your show, convert it all over to E1.31 and run it that way. Discovery, match IP addresses to resolved host names. This is a bit behind the scenes in Discovery, but basically it's matching things that it's already discovered based on host names as well, and stopping it from creating duplicates when it does discovery. The apply setting key binding option, we already covered a number of these, but when you're in the sequencer, I must have changed over folders. But when you're in the sequencer, there's this update button. Well, this basically says there's now an apply setting key binding, which you can set to be bound to that button, so that when you press that key, it presses that update button. Add controller IP and description to the controller visualizer. What does that mean? Well, that just basically means that when you're in the visualize controller here now, up in the title bar here, it gives you, the name of the I don't have a name on this one, so that's why there's no name in it, but it tells me the IP address, which in this case happens to be multicast. And when you print it, you'll get the same thing. It'll display it, so you'll know which one it was for. Adding additional controller types. So this is just, when you're in here, additional controller types in this list, which is getting pretty long these days. Just so you can see what I was talking about. If we call that Mary and we visualize the controller, it says Mary up here. So that's that one. Track and set the expansion board type on. Okay. Once again, yet more. More types of expansions. So which type of expansion is here? So these things have all been broken out into many, many different types. Spend more time finding your controller in the list than you are doing anything else. Add arbitrary custom model data rotation. Well, what does that mean? Well, if we go to layout, let's quickly go and download a model. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to deliberately choose one of these. Let's do the 3-pong. Okay. What if we do node layout on? Actually, let's do wiring view on this. So he started this in the middle on the top, but what happens if my rotation has this thing? I don't know. Maybe it's down here, right? So it's 60 degrees to the left. So I need to rotate this data. Now, a lot of people would just come up here and grab this and rotate it around. The problem with that is that's not going to actually generate the results you expect, because when we do the effect buffer, we always render effects on the buffer as if the model was not rotated, unless you're using per preview. So you actually want to rotate the data itself. And so what we need to do is we need to come into here to the model data, and we actually want to rotate this data around so that instead of 1 being here, we want to rotate it. Well, it was to the left, but in fact it's to the right. So we want to rotate it 60 degrees this way. And so now you have this rotate X. And I think that's -60, because I think by default it's actually anti-clockwise. So let's do that by -60 degrees. Oh no, I was wrong. Okay, so let's cancel out of that. Never double rotate. If you make a mistake, always cancel and go back in and redo the rotation. It's not that it won't work, it's just that errors accumulate because everything's an approximation. And so what you're going to find is if you keep rotating it multiple times, everything just gets slightly out of place, and before you know it, you've just got a mess. So you're better off canceling it and going back and redoing the rotation by 60 degrees. And now it's moved that 1 slightly around. 60 was probably not enough. I probably needed to do 120. So let's go back again, just proving the point. And we're going to rotate it by 120 degrees. And now the 1 is down there where we expected it to be. So now we can click OK, And now when we do our wiring view, we would expect to see it down here, and that's where it is. So yeah, so you can now arbitrarily rotate your custom models. But you know, at the end of the day, there's a resolution problem here. It's got to try and work out where it is. It's also possible that as you rotate things due to rounding errors, things will start to overlap with each other, and xLights will try and keep them apart. And so this can lead to situations where you know, the model starts to look a bit messy, particularly on really dense models. So I will caution you, there are limits to it. Add the ability to load SRT subtitle files as timing tracks. Oh, okay, what does that mean? Well, basically, the SRT file format, and I actually don't know how to produce them. They come from YouTube, but someone sent me one. And so I can import a timing track here, and I'm going to choose these SRT files, a subrip subtitle file. So now I have to find one of these. And so we'll do a sort here on SRT files. Okay, there's a YouTube subtitle file. And so basically it's a subtitle file from YouTube. And so it brings those lyrics in. So if it was a music video, obviously you might have the actual lyrics to the song in, and it brings them in and it places them roughly according to whereabouts in that video clip that text was being sold. Now it's not perfect, right? Because with subtitles, it's not like your lyric tracks where you know you want them to start at the point at which they begin to sing the phrase. They often show them a little bit early. They might finish them a little bit early as well, or maybe a little bit late. So you're still going to have to tweak them, but it obviously saves you typing them all in, and it puts them roughly in the right place. So it gives you a step up. So if you can Google and work out how to extract the SRT files from YouTube, maybe it saves you a little bit of time, assuming that the audio file that you're using is roughly equivalent to the audio file from YouTube. Oh, okay. All right. This one's a little bit harder to do, but so basically, here's what happens, right? So if I've got this particular circle model here, okay, let's get it out of the Fred preview. Let's put it back in default. Let's go back to default. Okay, so we're back in default. So when you set start channels in here, one of the things that people can do is they can come up here and they can specify a specific IP address. Now, we generally don't recommend this, right? You do not need to put an IP address here unless you are using the same universe numbers on multiple controllers. And we don't generally recommend that. On really, really large shows, some people like to do this because it makes their life a little bit simpler. But on a regular display, we would generally recommend that you keep your universe numbers unique across all of your controllers, and then you can just leave this as any. But when you have set up a controller and said, look, yeah, that's universe 21 on that particular controller, if I was to go back to that controller, this one here, and if I was to edit its IP address and make that 02 and click OK, is that right? Yeah, it is. And now I was to go back to the layout, I'm going to get an error. That should have changed. Okay, I'm not sure why that didn't change. But look, the concept is, oh, actually, you know why? I know why it didn't change. It didn't change because I think I set these oh no, I can't have set the multicast up. All right, I'm totally lost as to why that didn't change. But what it was meant to do was it was meant to change that IP address there to be 02 because it was the last controller, last output that happened to be on that IP address. I have to go back and take a look at that and see why it didn't work. All right, we're skipping over. Okay. All right, so this is some enhancements to that FPP Connect dialog. So some tooltips if you go up to the headers, and that I can probably show because There's no FPP instance, but there's now tooltips up here, so you can see what each one of these things actually means. And people do get confused by these, so I do suggest you go up there and take a look. And he's also added some right-click options down here if there was items here that allow you to bulk select and bulk unselect things. Auto-enable canvas mode for shaders that require it. All Scott's saying there is sometimes when you download one of these shaders, some of the shaders are really so take something like bulge. Bulge is one that actually distorts the effect underneath it. And so in order for that to work, we require this to be a canvas mode. And so Scott's basically saying, well, if we're smart enough to know that this needs canvas mode, then I may as well turn it on by default. When you drop that particular effect down, it makes it much more likely that it's going to work first time. Add remote details to visualize exported CSV files. Okay, so we didn't quite show that, and because I haven't set any remotes up, this is not really going to leap out at you. But when you do a visualize, you can now right click and do a save as CSV. Let's put it there. Let's go back to our desktop and open it up. So Scott's basically included a whole bunch of details in here, and he would have included the remote details if these things had been set up on remotes. In this case, they weren't, so it didn't, but that's what that one means. Check sequence to check for reuse of a show folder name in subdirectories. All right, I do want to spend a bit of time on this because this has caught a few people out, and this is one of these things that lots and lots of people just do not understand, and it creates an enormous array of issues when people are doing imports. I will say it again. I've said it before. I'll say it again. If you find yourself needing to fix up the paths to images and videos and shaders, etc., after you've imported a sequence, you're importing the sequence wrong. The sooner you learn the process for correctly importing a sequence, the sooner all of that frustration will just evaporate. But there's a couple of things that you need to be aware of. So a typical show folder is, C:/ I don't know. I'm on a Windows machine, but look, it really doesn't matter if it's a Mac as well, because this stuff all works. C users Fred documents /xLights /show /2019 /Christmas right, and that might be my show folder. And then underneath that, of course, I might have an audio folder, an images folder, videos folder. It really doesn't matter, right? Or I might have, sequence XYZ folder, and I might put all my sequence data in there, and I might have an imported folder, etc., etc. So this folder here is the folder that contains your xLights _RGB effects.xml file, right? And consequently, this is your show folder, and specifically this folder here is your show folder. Not everything before it and not anything after it. This is the show folder. Okay, so first of all, this must not contain a date. Why must it not contain a date? Well, because all of the automatic fixing up of file names, etc., is based on this name. So if you put a date inside this name and then you copy this folder next year and you change it from 2019 to 2020, the show folder name has changed and all of the automatic fix-ups don't work. And so now you're back into bulk edit and manual editing of all your file locations to try and get your sequences working again, right? My show folder is called home, right? It's a totally agnostic name for a show folder. Now you can have 2019 underneath here. If you want, that's fine. You can have anything you like underneath here, right? It doesn't, in this case, it's C:, but, this could equally be /home/Fred. if you're on OS X or Linux, etc. It really doesn't matter, because when xLights looks at it, it is keying off this folder here. Now, I don't know. Let's go and do that. Now, there is one problem or one limitation to this. If there was a folder here called xLights /imported /home / I don't know, audio, or something like that, this folder name here being the same as this one up here is going to cause you issues. Because when it's trying to fix up a file name that's under here, it's going to go looking up through the folders, and it's going to find this home here, and it's going to mistake this home for this home. And so all of the fix-ups are not going to work for anything that happens to sit underneath this folder. So I strongly recommend that whatever you make this name here, that name here is unique and never reused as a folder underneath here. So what does this particular, whoops, it says losing track of the screens. So what does this mean? What this means is that when check sequence now runs check sequence on your sequence, it's going to spot situations like this where you've used this home name here, and it's the same as your show folder name, and it's going to say, hang on a second, that's going to cause you problems, and it's going to flag it for you in the check sequence. I've seen a number of circumstances where people have had this, and the whole automatic file name fix-up has just not worked. All right, that's that one. All right, no enhancements in 45. 46, add an option to hide the body of a moving headlight. Yeah, look, I mean, this is just an aesthetic thing. But if I set this to be a 3D headlight, for instance, what happens if you don't actually want to see the body of the light, you just want to see the beam? Well, there's now a hide body checkbox here, and it will hide that and just show the beam, right? And when you move the beam around, let's set it to, I don't know, 55. Oops. Tilt channel, tilt orientation, okay. Right, and so it just shows the beam and leaves the body out, which you may want in your preview, rather than seeing the body of the moving headlight. Alternate wiring to the candy cane model. In fact, alternate wiring has been added to candy canes and to icicles and to polylines where they're icicles. And what this means is there's now this alternate nodes thing. So by default, if you look at the wiring view for a candy cane, we assume that you're going to start here and wire all the way up to the end. And then, of course, you're going to have to run a piece of wire all the way back down to join onto the next candy cane. Now, that's just not a very efficient way to wire candy canes. A much better way is to click the alternate nodes and right-click and do the wiring view. And now you can see here that what it's done is it's alternated the wiring. So pixel 1's here, then pixel 2 jumps over 1 and becomes pixel 2, then pixel 3 another jump, and so on, all the way up to the end, and then it jumps all the way back. And the beauty of this is the last pixel on the candy cane is now the second pixel up. And so it's much easier to connect it through to the next candy cane. So a much more efficient wiring scheme. And the same's true of icicles. He says, looking for icicles. If you do your icicles, you also have an alternate nodes here. And if you do the node layout, you'll see that, node 1, then node 3, then node 2. So jump 1, come back. Here's node 4. Jump 1, go one more up, jump back, and go along. And so that makes it very easy for you to do to wire up the icicles without having to buy special pixels with the extra wire in them and so forth. The other thing that a lot of people don't realize is, let's imagine you've got 7 drop icicles, but then maybe you've got 2 single nodes going along on the top. Well, you can just go here and go 7, 1, 1. And it will create 7 drop icicles with 2 1 drops. And when you look at the node layout on this, the wiring view on this, right, it creates a useful wiring layout. right? We're looking at it from the rear again. So you got 1, then jump over 1 to 2, jump over 1 to 3, jump over 1 to 4, then come back 5, 6, 7, and then the 2 along the top, the 3 along the top, and then it jumps back down again. So with a regular string of pixels, you can wire these icicles up. Now you're probably going to want to, excuse me, you're probably going to want to submodel this, etc., so that you can put text on it and compress it and all of that sort of stuff. But as a wiring layout, this is much more logical for icicles and saves you spending that extra money on those fancy icicle pixels. Add sorting to the controller connection. What that means now is you can click on this column up here and it will sort things. Now, I don't really have much of the controller connection set up here, but what it will do is it will sort all of these models here by controller, by port. Or by protocol, by port. So all your DMXs will be separate from your 2811s, etc. So that will be, generally it'll be in the wiring order that you've done, which may or may not be your start channel order. So clicking on controller connection, if you've got all of this filled in, is more likely to put models together that are actually connected together. Add setup export to the models export. Okay, so we've got a models export up here, and enough people had complained over time that they really, oh, there it is down the bottom, that they really wanted to see an export of the setup tab. And so now at the bottom here, you get an export of basically the setup tab, each output listed. Now it does break stuff up. So you have, this was a multi-output E1.31. It actually breaks it up so that you can see each and every one of them. And so it duplicates the rows if you like. And it will have a whole bunch of properties. Now, many of these properties are unique and special to particular protocols. And so, yeah, so they won't all be populated, but if your auto size, for instance, applies to only some protocols, same with FPP proxy. Don't configure is only relevant to ZCPP. The supporting smart remotes, etc., again, only relevant to certain types of controllers. But now all of that data is available in that list. Add progress, we're generating random effects, okay? The reason for that, and let's not try to do too many of them, but if you're in here and you've got a timing track, which is a metronome, you click OK, you click OK, and you come down to here and you right click and say, create random effects. This process actually runs quite slowly, as you can see, right? It's progressively filling it in, but it runs quite slowly. And some people were thinking that it hung, and it hasn't. So now we've put up a nice progress dialog that gives you, you can see it happens. User email in logs. Okay. So what this one is when the first time you load xLights, which is probably some time ago for most of you, it would have prompted you and asked you to enter your email address. You can also get to it down here in the settings menu, where you can type in your email address and xLights will store it. And when it submits a crash report, it will include your email address in that crash report. Now you don't have to do it. So you can click no thanks here and it will become no1@nowhere.xlights.org. And obviously we won't reach out to you. Now we're generally not going to reach out to you either way. But every now and then we look at a crash report, and particularly if it's an import from another sequence format or something else, and we see this person has been doing the import and it's crashed 3 or 4 times, and you look at it and say, if only that person would have reached out to us and said, hey, this is crashing, here's my sequence, this is what I'm doing, and it crashes, we could have fixed the problem. And so by doing it this way, it lets us potentially reach out to you and say, hey, we see you're having lots of crashes trying to do an import. How about you share the file with us and your mapping, etc., and we'll see if we can reproduce the problem and fix it. The other thing that it lets us see is it does also allow us to associate crashes. So we can also see if some individuals got lots and lots of crashes, and potentially we can reach out to them as well and ask them if there's a particular problem that they're having that maybe we can help with. The one thing I can promise is 99 times out of 100, you're not going to hear from us. So there's that one. Shift scroll wheel in the node select dialog. What this means, and I don't have a scroll wheel, so I'm not going to be able to show it, but when you're in the submodels dialog here, you've added a submodel and you're in the node select model here, and it's really wide. Then basically, if you've got the scroll wheel, you can scroll up and down if this is really long, but you can also scroll left and right by holding down that shift key. And then you can scroll left and right using the scroll wheel rather than having to reach for the scroll bars and move things across. That's all that means. While I'm at it, Scott's also changed it here so that as you click and drag, it just automatically, it used to be that you'd click and drag and then you'd have to come down and select, etc. So now you can just click and drag and it will toggle the selection of anything that you click and drag on, which does make this a little quicker to use. It obviously means it can be a little bit more finicky sometimes where you didn't actually want to select that thing, but overall I think it's a little bit faster as a way to edit submodels than the previous way. Added submodel phoneme state name. Oh, okay. Let's go back there. All he's saying there is he's put the name of the submodel that you happen to be editing up here in the title, but also works when you're using states and faces as well. Add the random effect selection dialog. Okay. I'm trying to remember where this is. Set allowed random effects. There it is. So basically, this gives you a little bit of control over the random effect generation. It allows you to come into here and basically say, well, look, when you're generating random effects, I only want these particular effect types. You can, of course, right-click here, which enables you to, deselect all and then just come through and say, I only want lines effect when I do random. And so now when I come up here and do random, create random effects, every effect that it creates is going to be a lines. It's just going to be slightly different settings on the lines. Okay, so that's what that one is. We added alternate drop nodes. So we already showed that on the icicles. It also works on the polyline as well. You can do alternate drop nodes there as well. For those that didn't realize, the polyline model does support icicles. Obviously by default it doesn't, but if you come into here and you set a drop pattern and say it's a 5-drop pattern, then your polyline will become like that. And the beauty of this is, he knows where gravity is, and so it automatically makes them drop down. So if you're doing across the peak of your house, etc., it automatically lines everything up and does that drop pattern. And you can now set the alternate drop nodes here as well, so that wiring pattern is going to be set up correctly. The challenge with this is there's actually no way to see the wiring pattern, but you can see the node layout, and you can see here that it has done them alternately. So that's all good. This is the one I just showed you with the node select dialog to select them as you highlight them. Makes it a little bit faster. Latitude control to the sphere model. So let's imagine your sphere does not actually go all the way to the end, but maybe it ends maybe 60 degrees up. You now have this southern and northern latitude. So you can say, look, the southern latitude is -60, and the northern latitude is 60. And you'll notice that the sphere now has a bit of a gap at the top. You can go further. You can say, well, minus 45 or 45. And so you get a sphere model that's now not a full sphere. It's got a gap. And if I put that in 3D mode, it might be a little bit easier to see. As you can see how it doesn't go all the way to the top. It only goes part of the way. So because when you do a sphere model, obviously, if you look at this one here, at the top, everything's very, very close together. So in all likelihood, you're probably not actually going to build it that way. It's going to be something closer to this. So the latitude controls let you draw that model a little bit more accurately. WMV video file support, that just means that now when you're in here and you're dropping down a video effect, for some reason, and I only vaguely remember why, WMV files were not an option here, but now if I type star.wmv in here, right, you can now load a WMV file and it will render correctly and display. So it gives you some additional video file formats that it supports. Level and level note versions of the Jump 100 in VU Meter. Again, so we've had Jump and Jump 100 for quite some time now. Timing event. So we had timing event Jump. And what timing event Jump would do, you choose, say, your metronome here. And every time it hits one of those timing events, it would jump up to the height of, or the intensity of the music at that point in time on the timing marks. And then there was Jump 100, which basically just jumps to 100% each time it hits a timing mark. But for some reason, we hadn't actually done it based on the level. And so now level Jump 100, for instance, allows you to have it jump, instead of jumping on the timing mark, it jumps according to when the music reaches this sensitivity level. And so you can set the sensitivity appropriately, and when the song hits that level of intensity of the music, it will jump to 100 and then fall away. So it's just a different way of triggering those jumps. Added auto size channels to DDP output. What does this mean? Well, basically, you can add a DDP in here now, 192.168.0.10, and you can just say auto size the output down here and click OK. And what it will do is, as you when you now add models over here, if I was to go and add this to that controller, instead of using the start channels, okay, that didn't help. I forgot to give it a name. You need to give it a name in order to use this. Come back to here. And so now instead of saying use start channel, what else did I not do right? Use auto start channels, there it is. So auto sizing the output and use automatically using start channels. So what that will do is that will auto arrange the models on this particular controller. And so now I can come in here and say DDP. I can go down and set the port number to be port number 1. And if I go back to my setup, it's automatically resized the DDP output, and it will also do all of the same things as ZCPP does in terms of automatically managing your models within that controller. And because DDP, it doesn't really care about its size, it makes it easier. Basically, the data will just get pushed up to your controller. Now, of course, it won't configure the outputs on your controller. That's the gap that DDP has versus ZCPP. But it does allow you to do all your start channels and everything, but you do need to remember to come back to your DDP, right click and do an upload to your particular controller to ensure that your controller understands where everything is. But it saves you from having to manage the DDP output so manually. Right click select to random effects selection. Oh, okay, we saw that. We saw it when we had that, when we had this allow random effects. I showed that you can right click here and you can select all or deselect or highlight selected. So all of that's there. Import from submodel to faces and states dialog. Probably going to be a little hard to show, but what he's saying here is that he's now added this import from model and import from file. So if you've got a model here that should have faces on it and you've got another model that already has the faces on it because you want to bring it in, well, you can now import those from that other model or from that model file, and it will copy across the face definition or the state definition. So if you've added 3 models in, you've now gone into one of the models, you set up all your faces, etc. Then you go to your next model and say, oh, I really need the face settings from that other model. You can now just import them across from the other model rather than deleting the model and copying it again and then reconfiguring it, etc., etc. That's what it's about. And so that's those 2 there. Suppress version. Okay, so one of the things you can do with xLights supports a set of command line options which enable you to do things like set up a batch file to run xLights to do rendering. One of the things that we were doing when you start xLights is we do go out and check to see whether there's a new version of xLights available. The problem is of course that then interrupts the batch flow because it starts up xLights and it says, oh, there's a new version, and it puts up a dialog box and you've got to go and deal with that, which means your batch rendering doesn't really work the way you'd planned it to. And so now what we've done is we've suppressed that version check when you're running in that mode, and it won't check, so it won't give you a warning or anything, it'll just ignore the check. Building custom models and live wiring preview. Okay, so this is kind of cool. So if we go in to our model data, you'll notice that down here you can actually zoom in on, he says, why did that not work? Let's reset it. Okay, there we are. All right, that's interesting. Not sure why that's not zooming. I have to look at that. All right, but basically what it's doing here is it's showing you the model. I can show the wiring as well just by clicking that bar there. There's definitely a problem there for some reason. But it's showing you should be able to click and drag and move this around. This is primarily here. Yeah, there's definitely something broken here. The idea here is that you can see it, and when you're doing 3D, as you add pixels onto here, those things will show up. And there's definitely a problem where it's a big problem. Anyway, doesn't matter. We'll go and fix that. But yeah, it's showing you it in real time. So as you add each pixel, the pixel appears. And when you're building 3D models, this is incredibly useful because it's really hard to using the grids at the top to keep track of where every pixel is. And this lets you spin around and look at the model as you build it. Notice the yellow pixel is pixel number 1. So you can orientate yourself around where the first pixel is. And with the wiring view, you can obviously see that everything's connected. If the numbers are discontiguous, then obviously you will not get them connected to the prior number. You'll get a gap in the wiring, which is what you would expect. I'm going to have to go back and look at why that's acting up. I'm sure it was working a release or 2 ago. A couple of things to look at. Always is when you go through everything. Adding suppression of vendor downloads you don't want. So in the downloads, we've currently got 2 essential repositories here. We've got the Papagayo repository and the DMX fixture library. The DMX fixture library is huge. It's like got 6,000 models in it, which was taking a fair bit of time to download. And my bet is that 90% or 99% of you do not use it or ever want to see it. So now what you can do is you can click this checkbox and say, don't download it. Now, by default, it won't download this one, but it will download by default the Papagayo one. But you can also suppress it here as well if you're not a user of the Papagayo, but you did want to get access to the DMX fixture library. And if and or when other vendors decide to include their stuff in here, they'll appear in here. And it just allows you to speed up the loading of this dialog because it doesn't have to reach out to that vendor's site and pull down and load all of their models. So it just runs a little bit quicker if you suppress the vendors that you're not interested in seeing. Rudimentary Vixen 3 import. So for some time now, we've offered the ability to import timing tracks from Vixen. It was only a subset of the timing tracks in Vixen. So now, however, why did that not find any? Start.tim. Okay. Oh, because I've got it on X timing. That's why. Let's go back to here. We'll do start.tim again. I know I have a few. All right, so here's one here. And you can see that it's found a whole bunch of timing marks inside that sequence, which you can now bring in just by selecting on them, and it will bring them in. It'll also bring in lyric tracks from Vixen as well. So if someone wants to find a whole bunch of Vixen lyric tracks, it will bring them in as xLights lyric tracks, and you'll be able to use them. We've also added in import effects now the ability to import from a Vixen sequence as well. Now, at this point, this just brings in the effects, okay? So we make no attempt whatsoever to make the settings on the effect match the settings that were in Vixen. It just brings the closest matching effect in at the right time for the right duration. Everything else is down to you, right? So I realize that that's a pretty poor import, but it's better than nothing. So, you know, and you do it just like you would any other import. You just bring it in, you just put all the effects down, you map it, you click OK, you can save an X mapping file. And did it bring anything interesting in? Oh, yeah, there you go. It did bring some things in over here. Oh no, or they're my random effects. Oh, it brought in these effects over here on the left. I must admit, I don't actually know what's in that sequence, but yeah, all of these on effects and snowflake effects, etc., have been brought across. Now, again, none of these settings, none of the colors, notice how none of the colors are selected, notice how none of the effect settings are anything other than the default. So that's what's going to happen. It's going to bring it in. It's going to bring it in with the default settings for that particular effect. It's not in any way going to try to match exactly what Vixen 3 had, but it gives you a starting point, and you can then go through and fine-tune things, and hopefully it saves you a little bit of time. Over time, who knows? For those people who are really, the reality is when it comes to the imports, if people reach out to us and are willing to work with us to enhance and get these things to work better, I'm happy to entertain that. The challenge I've got is I know next to nothing about Vixen 3. I kind of know how to start it up. I've kind of got some sequences that some people have sent me in the past for me to play with, but I really don't know a great deal about Vixen, and I sure as hell don't know how to exactly what something should look like. And so when someone reaches out to us and says, look, I want to spend some time with you, these particular effects, I'd really like them to come in automatically because I've got 1,000 of them to import and it's just going to kill me to have to reset them all up manually. We're happy to work with you on that and try to make that better. And over time, the import will get better. Now, the reality is in our experience, is people don't. And the odds that someone who's using Vixen 3 has reached this point in the video and is listening is pretty slim, but whatever. If you want to work with us, we're happy to work with you and try to make it better. But if no one expresses an interest, we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on a Vixen 3 import that no one's using. In fact, the only reason it got released was because one individual really desperately needed a Vixen 3 import. And I said, well, look, I've got something really basic working. I could release it. And so I have. So that's it. There was a couple of bugs there that I'm going to have to go back and look at and try and work out why they didn't work correctly. But generally speaking, everything else was okay. As you can see, the number of new enhancements has dropped away over the back half of the year. That's kind of normal. There are a lot more bug fixes in those releases. I don't generally go through those unless they're super critical. Hopefully all of your builds are going well. It's coming to crunch time. Many of you have already started to set up, and those that haven't will be doing so in the next few days. If you run into issues, strongly suggest take advantage of the Facebook group and take advantage of the Zoom call, particularly if you've got complicated setup issues. The Zoom call is by far the best place to get help. Because people can actually see what you've done. If you think there are bugs in xLights, please take the time. One of the things that was added, sorry, I need to get a browser. When you create an issue in GitHub these days, if I go here and create a new issue, bug report, you'll notice that there's a whole bunch of text down here. Please take the time, read this text and fill in it along, follow the guidance that is in here. The reality is a lot of bugs get reported with just way too little detail and mean that we've got to run around trying to work out what the hell you've done. Sending us a simple sample and a reliable set of instructions for us to reproduce it mean that bugs get fixed typically within 24 hours and released within a week. When you put something really vague in here, it either sits there unattended to, or we write the inevitable, can you share us some files, etc. Save us some time. Just put all that stuff in up front and you're much more likely to get your bug fix first time. So thanks, guys. Good luck with Christmas 2019. I doubt there'll be another release update video unless there's one quite close to Christmas. So have a great Christmas and we'll see you all in the new year.